This is where it gets good, and this is where it gets scary.
Aggregate what they can do with the PS team effects, and we talk about
Greetings and welcome back to my channel. My name is Brett. I'm glad you're here for another video. In this video, we are reviewing Rosemary's Baby. This is an original book club copy of this novel that I picked up from the Tversky collection. This novel was published in 1967 and released in 1968, which made Ira Levin 38 years old when he wrote this horror novel. This is a psychological horror novel. It is very, very suspenseful, and it's very, very slow moving. It's one of those novels that starts out slow and winding, but it's steadily winding tighter and tighter, and as it's winding, the suspense is getting more and more identifiable. These instances of horror are very, very minute. It's like they're little breadcrumbs, and he'll toss the breadcrumb, but you have to pay attention because every breadcrumb means something, and you know that it's going to mean something. You just have no idea what it's going to mean. So if you do enjoy that type of horror that starts out very, very slow and builds up, but along the way, the story rides on its reputation. This was written before I was born, but I knew about this novel as a child. I didn't know about the novel. I knew about the movie Rosemary's Baby as a child, and it immediately fell into that horror category with The Exorcist, The Shining, those really, really masterful horror movies. That's what I would rank this novel as being one of those really, really masterfully done horror movies. I'll tell you this, there's a lot to uncover. There is definitely a lot to unpack in this novel because it deals with a lot of themes that are still relevant today. It deals with religion. It deals with, because it was written in the 60s, of course, that was during the Stepford era, the 60s and 70s, the age of the Stepford wives, the Stepford women. So this was steeped heavily in the formal, domesticated life of a woman who is a housewife. First and foremost, that's her job. Having a baby, building a family, and those things become her primary concerns as the novel takes place. So let's get into it. Let's dive a little deeper. Okay, this is the story of Rosemary and Guy Woodhouse. Beginning of the story, they're looking for an apartment. They just signed a lease on an apartment in New York. So they signed a lease for a place that they saw in New York, in Manhattan. And lo and behold, they receive an opportunity to move into the Branford. Now, the Branford is next level for them. They're just like, oh man, the Branford. This is a one-of-a-kind opportunity. It's one of those Manhattan apartment buildings that never ever open. You know, there's never room for someone to move into it. But there's a catch to this Branford. The Branford is very much believed to be haunted. It's a historic building, and it was described as having these gargoyles on the, kind of like Gotham City. They have these gargoyles just hanging around on the side of the building, and it's just like this gothic decor. And that right there, as soon as that's mentioned in the novel, I got chills. Like, okay. okay, this is steeped in horror, the kind of horror that you're expecting. You know it's gonna happen. You know it's gonna happen. You just don't know when. You just don't know where. And you just don't know how. So I did a little research on the Branford, and it was based off of a true building in Manhattan called the Dakota. The Dakota was built in 1884, and it was 1 West 72nd Street in Manhattan. And they believed this building to be haunted, which, you know, is neither here or there. So it's haunted. I believe that many buildings are probably haunted. I believe that the spirit of people who once lived in many buildings are probably floating around in other buildings or houses or stores or malls or basements, that type of thing. But in this apartment building, this famous apartment building, the Dakota, the real life, where John Lennon and his wife stayed there, and it just so happened to be the building that he was shot in front of, his building in 1980. So with that kind of thought in mind, I didn't know this till afterwards, but I wish that this novel had said that in the beginning, and it wasn't something that you had to research. I don't think it would have necessarily helped the story, because the story was fine without that knowledge, and it's such an amazing fact. But I think that perhaps even adding that in even a small way, like adding it to the jacket, turns this into more of a nonfiction, or it just gives the appearance of it being nonfiction. That's the Branford, and it's important to know that, because this is an old creepy building with a terrible reputation that they move into. So creepy, in fact, that Rosemary's best friend, who's a great character in this story as well, his name is Hutch, and Hutch is her older, kind of a best friend type of situation, and he's very, very protective of Rosemary, and he's very, very suspicious. That's the character that he portrays in the book. So when she told him that, hey, we have an opportunity to move into the Branford, oh, you mean that haunted abode? I can't believe there's so many other places that you live. Why on earth would you want to live in such a place? So he played that role, and he did very well throughout the story. He became a very, very significant character in the story. I just can't tell you how. So keep that in mind if you decide that you want to read this novel. I found myself from chapter to chapter getting more wrapped up in the suspense and the waiting, and I'm reading faster and faster because I'm waiting for the next clue that the author is going to drop, the next breadcrumb that's going to unleash all of this horror that I'm expecting out of this novel. And the horror came, but it came in waves, and there were small, tiny waves and ripples in the fabric of the story, and you have to pay attention. Okay, I enjoyed the suspense so much, and I'm not necessarily a horror guy. I enjoyed the suspense in this novel so much that I hardly ever read it in the daytime. I found myself wanting to read this at night. I was entertained by this novel. I loved the style that it was written in. I loved the descriptions, old 60 descriptions of the buildings, and the dialogue reflected the 60s. It was tastefully done, but it did address a lot of societal expectations, so to speak. It was one of those situations where Guy is the man, so he's in charge. He has the final say. She has to be a supportive wife. However, he has to stay in his box, his support role of being quote unquote head of household. He has to stay in his role, and she has to stay in her role. And whenever there was any situations between them as far as marriage goes that altered that, it was like, okay, I can get out of this because this is the expectation and you're required to meet it. So just like this movie deals with issues concerning women's rights and women having a voice in a marriage and in society, it definitely touched on those themes. But just like the man was supposedly in charge, he had to totally do that thing, because if there were instances where Rosemary would question everything simply based on her needs not being met. So we're dealing with a couple and everyone has a role, everyone has a job, everyone has a position, and they had to stay in those roles for their lives to work and their lives to make sense. Her husband is an actor. He's not the most famous actor, but he's getting work. He's getting regular work, and he's been recognized in a couple of performances. So he is an ambitious actor, and he doesn't necessarily, and this is all things that you can read in the jacket of the book, by the way, so I'm not going to go all super deep and give you any spoilers, but he doesn't want any children. He's an ambitious actor, and he's kind of in a place where he wants his acting to be first. That's what he does. And Rosemary is a supportive wife, although she wants children, so she's ready to start a family. They're married, she's ready to start a family, and eventually they do. They eventually start a family. He eventually kind of gives in. I feel like he kind of gives in the story, and they start a family. But this is where it gets good, and this is where it gets scary. They move into this new building. They're starting a family. They meet this couple. Now, when they move in, she's not pregnant. I do have to make that distinction. She's not pregnant when they move into the building. So they move into the building and they meet this couple, Minnie and Roman. She's a full-fledged nosy Karen, but in a likable way. So she inserts herself in because she's very, very helpful. We're talking about a dynamic that pits young people against old people, in the sense that old people are kind of looking for their next project, or looking to be their nurturing, helpful selves. And these young people, they don't want all that help. They do when they want it, but when they don't want it, they're like, oh God, Minnie's at the door again, right? And her husband is Roman, who is retired and just as likable. It didn't really say what Roman did for a living, but he's very well traveled. He is full of these stories that stem from his travels, and there was a mention of his father being a famous, I think, theater, like a theater performer. So his dad was a theater performer. So, and he took a liking to Guy, of course, because he was an actor. So it was kind of a dynamic where Guy was right on board with the family of old people right out the gate. That set the stage of the story, because now we get a backstory of the Branford, and we get the tea on all the other tenants that live in the building. Let's not forget about Hutch. Hutch is Rosemary's best friend. He's an older guy. He's a central figure in this story. You need the skeptic, because we're talking these Stepford times, and for some reason, as I'm reading this story, all I could think was how easy it is to manipulate people who act, especially in this story, people who act the way that they feel like they're supposed to act because of society or because of religion. People who are very, very predictable. People who are so kind that they would never want to hurt your feelings, even if it causes them discomfort, personal discomfort, to not do so. So they just kind of bite their lip a little bit and laugh about it afterwards. And I think that those type of people, especially in stories like this, proves it that they are pretty much easier to control because you can pretty much figure out what they're going to do next. So that really comes into play in this story, and I can't tell you how, but it helps solidify this story. And I'll tell you, the suspense builds up during her pregnancy, Rosemary's pregnancy. During Rosemary's pregnancy, the suspense just keeps building up through the highs and lows of pregnancy. And the way that the author keeps signaling these different directions, it allows your mind to do a little bit too much investigative work. So you're like, okay, so this is gonna happen, but this can't happen because this is gonna happen. Oh, this is gonna happen. So throughout the whole thing, I was on board early on because I knew that it would get heavy, and it took a while. And I'll tell you, there were some moments in this story where I was like, wait a minute, I need more. I need something else to happen. And then, boom, something else happened. So the timing was maybe not in the timing that I'm used to, but definitely the timing was on point. I enjoyed this novel, and I think if you read this novel, you would enjoy it too. It is 245 pages. What would I give it? If I was rating this novel, I guess I would give it 3 out of 5, because that's what I would give it. I would give it 3 stars out of whatever. This is a solid novel. This is a good novel. I enjoyed reading it. It took a little while to read because I was only reading in the evening, maybe a couple of reading sessions during the day, but I read it mostly in the evening, and I did enjoy the novel. So I will say that. Well, so this is it. I want to thank you for watching this video. If you have yet to subscribe to my channel, Black Lit Geek, I invite you to subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.
I aggregate what they can do with the Geek team, Castevets, and